Great.
Very good.
All right, cool. So,
Yeah, I think that sounds clearer. That sounds clearer, right?
Yeah, that's better.
All right, cool. So we're gonna kick this off with just like a quick reading. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this little page and a half, 2 pages or so, and then we're just gonna get into the full circle of it all. I wasn't sure what I was going to read because this is a very big homecoming for me. I was telling folks out in the crowd, they're like, this is really my college child. Like, this is really like the place where I got to have like an actual college experience and not just be abused consistently. So, what do you read when you're coming home? And then I was driving the car out of the rental spot at the Memphis airport. And the dude stops me and he's just like, yo, before you go though, do you know who you look like? Zeke's cousin. Hands. The first time I'm mistaken for Dallas Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott, all I can think is, well, damn, I've been told I look like worse. Over the years, I've gotten Jordan Peele, Michael Jackson, The Weeknd, Drake, and every other black kid in class I've known since the days we thought Gatorade could make us sweat blue. The man who will one day be godfather to my children and I bonded over being mistaken for each other 17 times. None of the black people I look like any of the other black people I look like. But it doesn't matter, because tonight in Mississippi, I'm in a bar called The Library with an anonymous white boy's hand on my shoulder. This doesn't make it anything but another Saturday. I figure a famous running back who actually looks enough like me that it can't only be racism isn't worth fucking up a night I finesse my way past a $45 cover charge for. All my life has proven there's a thin line between honesty, finesse, tradition, and side hustle. So I shake the white boy's hand just to get him to stop touching me. I give him my fake name and I go back to my drink. The bass is thick and the floor is clingy, and I think about what it would be like if I was all the black boys I'm supposed to be when the lights are low. Trust me, we'd be packed one wall to the other, a whole parade of mistakes. Since I moved to Mississippi in 2016, I've lost count of how many times I've had this talk, the one about who I look like but ultimately am not. Sometimes it's funny, like that one time when a college kid looking just like a malnourished Bob Costas hurtled across the entire athletic center to ask for a selfie with me. A hand settles on my shoulder, and most times that hand is attached to a white boy I have never met and will never see again. I don't like to be touched by strangers, but it's already happening. And the question is already out of the boy's mouth by the time I look up, hey, you know who you look like? Over the years, I've settled into a lie. And I sell this lie by half rolling my eyes as if I can't believe it's happening again. Then, very calmly, with full eye contact, I say, yeah, that's my cousin. Then, I slide my hand into his, and before he even has a chance to disbelieve it, we're dapping up, embracing. I'm congratulating the white boy for finding me. The thing is that I'm not Ezekiel Elliott's cousin, at least not in any way I can prove. We're cousins in the way that all black folks are maybe cousins. I came to Mississippi to find the graves of my family, to find our records, the plantations that stood because of the work of our hands, to finally have a clear portrait of where we started and where we've been. Every time I end up running this hustle, I get the same routine. I get the same result. Free drink. It's automatic, clockwork, routine. His hands, then my eyes, then my hands, and just like that, I'm gone. I learned it watching Allen Iverson and Barry Sanders. I learned it watching my father. Maybe we learned it from my great-grandfather, though neither of us ever met him. Either way, it's a good hustle. Hands, eyes, hands, crossover, gone, just like that, with all the intimacy of mirage. Maybe this is inheritance. How the white boy's hands mean home without him having to say it. How the men in my family all learn to disappear mid-sentence.
I love that. I love that. And I love this book. And I don't love the library, but I think when I moved I love the one on campus, but I think when I moved here, I was already out of that age bracket. so.
Exactly.
Okay, so what was the last time you were here? I want to start off by asking you that question. The last time you were in Oxford, Mississippi.
June 2021, when we were finding the end of the book. Yeah, June 2021.
And so with you, so that's what, about 3 years, just almost about 3 years. How does it feel being back? I love that you talked about this as being your kind of true college experience. And I kind of felt that while you were here. And we can talk more about that, but how does it, I just want to know, like, your current emotions, your current feelings, how do you feel now being back after 3 years?
You know, it's the kind of surreal stepping of like being both in a memory and in a dream at the same time. I think that, you know, like I can't, like when you and I first started working together, like my background was in slam. I came from slam. I was a slam brother. That's what I did, right? And so it meant that every poem, every piece of writing that I did, I thought of it first and imagined it first being read aloud to my community in Philly. And then slowly but surely it became, I know that it sounds corny because all of us are here to hear me say this, but I promise you it's true. It became here, right? It became here the more and more this book became what it wanted to be. Because when I first started out, Key was just telling me like, yo, why don't you try just a little bit of prose?
This kid still in?
Yeah. I was like, he was just like, just try a little bit of prose, like as a treat. And I was like, nah, I don't think that you understand. I don't do sentences. I do line breaks. And so he's like, just try it out. And so he finally was running his nonfiction workshop, and I wanted to come in with an understanding of what was important to me about essays so I could be a good workshop participant. And then it became this book of kind of just like, it was just supposed to be like cute TV takes. It was just supposed to be that there was never supposed to be anything in there about what it costs to stay alive. There was never supposed to be anything in there about my ancestry, because all of those things were supposed to be reserved for my thesis. But the thing is that all of those things end up bleeding over. And so as the book became more and more like this ode to this time that I had here, this way that like Mississippi is like always going to be home, always going to be in my blood, I would think about what is it going to be like to come back and do my second grad reading. And so yeah, it feels surreal for how long I have been sitting with this book, and also to be here now presenting it to folks.
It's really interesting that you say that, you know, your slam background, and I want to get to, you know, you first coming into the program, the MFA program here, because we have a great story about that, which is in the book. But, you know, we had that in common, that, you know, slam background. And I've always admired and adored and was excited by your commitment to both the page and the lyrical word, the stage, right? When I was reading this, when you sent it to me, because I got it like 5-6 months before everybody else, I noticed that same sort of attention to language. And so was that still a part of your process? Were you still reading the prose out loud or hearing it out loud as you were constructing these sentences?
Oh yeah, absolutely. From jump, I definitely. I try not to have any part of a book that I'm writing be something that I would be like annoyed if I had to read it aloud in public. Which is a weird bar to set for oneself, but it's also the bar that works for me. Nothing feels ready until it's ready to be on stage. So yeah, I think that I thought a lot about the sonics of that, and also just the fact that like, what I wanted was to try and illuminate a moment, right? There was this way that Hanif Abdurraqib, incredible writer, I'm sure many of us are fans of this room, certainly fans in this house.
That's the Hanif that appears in the book.
Yeah. Very same. Right. So Hanif was talking about how ultimately he writes from the perspective of the fan, right? This idea of, I'm going to take this thing that means the world to me, and I'm going to show you very, very slowly, and then all at once, that it means the world to you too. you just didn't know it yet. And so for me, there's so much about this book that lives and has to live in speculation, right? Like we're talking about what would have happened if my great-grandfather had not been spared by the people of the town who wanted him dead. What had happened if I am not spared by the me that wanted me dead? How do we put all of those things together? I think, yeah, just as a result of that, you have to start thinking about how do I take this very theoretical understanding of myself, put it in the hands of somebody who may never meet me, right? Who may never hear me read it, and still give them something to understand what this is just like. Like I can't introduce everyone to my grandmother. I actually can't introduce anyone to my grandmother anymore because she is with the ancestors now. But I can absolutely say that it's exactly like the Times Arrow episode of BoJack Horseman. All you need is $19.99 plus tax to figure out what that looks like.
I love that. And you talking about Sonics, I should have acknowledged your reading, right? Let's give him another hand. There's not a lot of folks in here, so, well, I mean, thank you all for being here, but I think I can spill some tea. I can just stay here amongst family. So, you were one of the few students that came through our MFA program where from the jump, I felt like, that's mine, give me that. Like, that's my child, right? For many reasons. So let's talk about how you were accepted into the MFA program, how you arrived to be a part of the MFA family at the University of Mississippi. How'd that go? And you talk about it in the book, but there's some things we leave out of the book.
For sure. So I messed up. That's the most important piece of the statement to this whole sentence. So what had happened was I was supposed to graduate with my class in 2015. I suffered a massive life-threatening bout of depression, and I did not get to do that. So 2016 is me working basically 4 or 5 different jobs while I'm also traversing from North Philly into my college, which was like deep in the heart of the suburbs, right? So going back and forth and back, the main thing for me always was that I felt like I could be so much better at writing if I didn't have to do all of this other nonsense.
Yes.
So I wanted to go to MFA programs. I sent off to 4 MFA programs. None of them were here, but that is only because I didn't know how dope here was, because there wasn't nobody talking about it until I ended up listening to this podcast. And one of the podcast members happened to be on the cohort above mine. And they said, if the project of Black liberation is that Black people feel safe everywhere, why then do we talk about it as if that's a project that can be achieved without Mississippi, without the Blackest state of the union, right? And so I was like, dang, that makes a lot of sense. And I also then double back to this story about my great-grandfather, this very light-skinned, white passing man, passing the right for a living. And suddenly, one day, what was always going to happen happens, and the town comes in and says, dang, that ain't no white man. Get out of here, or else we'll tar and feather you and all of yours to death. And so that is the story of how my grandmother was in position to meet my grandfather. It's the story of how I came to exist. And so I was like, screw it, let's try and like take a look at this Mississippi MFA program. And I had missed the deadline by 2 weeks.
Missed the deadline, y'all.
Smooth missed it because I didn't know I was even looking for it. And then I was like, dang. So I was upset. I go up to New York. My best friend, one of my best friends in the whole world, Nicholas, incredible photographer, incredible writer, one of the most wonderful people that you'll ever meet in your entire life. Is just one of those people who knows you're sad before you do. And I was sitting there eating food I couldn't afford. And he said, what's wrong? I said, nothing. He said, what's wrong? I said, nothing. He said, well, I'm going to ask you one more time, and then we're going to get physical. And I said, all right, fine. And so I told him the story. He said, well, why don't you just email him? Just try it. Like, MFA program, 16 years old, maybe they've never had a Black Latino poet before. try. And so I emailed Derrick, I emailed Beth Ann, and I emailed an email that KSA never checks. And Beth Ann was in Germany. So we are down to the big brother, who I did not even know was my big brother. And he takes the, 2-3 hours. Because the first time he saw the email, he's like, man, this brother arrogant.
The audacity.
Like the nerve.
Right.
And then April, Auntie Trill, was like, well, no, wouldn't you have needed just a little bit of grace once or twice? And just like, all right, that's right. I'll open pay. Fine.
That's right.
Somehow, some way, that turned into me being right here.
And so everything about the trajectory of you becoming a part of this community, a part of the MFA program, a part of the writing community, a part of your journey to conduct your research started off a little bit uncertain.
Oh, deep times uncertain. The entire time that I was here, I felt like I was living on the tail of a miracle.
Mm.
Like I really thought that I felt that I had cheated death. And I've been given a new life, and I just wanted to put my head down and produce as much as I could with the 3 years that I was going to have that new life, because whatever life I had afterwards was going to be a direct result of what seeds got sown here.
You mentioned your grandfather. I want to read a passage that really stuck out to me. It was my page 32, but I got the advanced edition, so it might not be y'all's. It might be y'all's 35, maybe. All right, you say, what I imagined was that Albert Leland clasped the hand of his wife and told her his plan to run his hustle for as long as the hustle was feeling generous with him. I love this image right here. Magnolias swayed everywhere. The whole state dressed for a wedding or a surrender. And so it was that my grandmother years later would be born in the blade of the Cleaver State, with the blues already coiling over her head. Within a year of my great-grandfather leaving Water Valley, the city hall of Water Valley burned down to the ground. 1 month later, the city clerk's office went the same way. Can you talk about your process of researching for his project, and how complicated was that the research involved family and your roots?
Man, it was so difficult. It was so difficult. It was one of those things where I don't know how many folks here came up in the North, but one thing that I think ends up being true of a lot of Midwestern families is that we have roots in just the South. Don't nobody say where directly you from. Like, there's ancestors whose names we speak only as ancestor, only in the general trajectory of things. And so the revelation that we had Mississippi roots was something that we had to pay Ancestry.com to double down and explain to us. So there's already this layer of access that you have that you already have a problem with. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want them to funnel everything together for me. I want to be able to touch something. Ultimately, the journey becomes less about finding the definitive smoking gun that I had originally come down here. I was like, I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna find the proof of what they did to us. And I was like, well, why would they write that down? Why would they keep it if they did write it down? So how do you find some proof that they were even there? And so we begin with Water Valley is 53 miles from here. So I would rent zip cars that I couldn't really afford to go drive down there for the day and try to get a sense for the town and what it was to be there, and to try and establish some kind of relationship with the city clerk's office. And that's when I was able to come to them and say, hey, I would love to see any of these records, any of the names for Wheelis, Curry, Leland. Those are my people's names. Is there anything like that here? And that's when they tell me that that whatever was going to be able to help me in that regard all burned down within a month of them being gone, which was mind-boggling, but also not mind-boggling. And once you figure that out, it's both heartbreaking, very convenient metaphor, very inconvenient research development, right? That like there's this path where we were Mississippians and that was burned down behind us, and how you manage that but also end up managing to feel steadfast in your understanding of things within like a Western tradition that's so steeped in, but where's the proof? Where's the thing that you held? And to be able to eventually find something of his, or with some record of his name, and where his address was, and where my grandmother had taken her first steps in Mississippi, and maybe her last steps in Mississippi, and then eventually, definitely her last steps in Mississippi. It was a long and heartbreaking journey, and it did not end up being able to get all done while I was here, and so there's a lot of shame to unpack about that. That like it's a hard shame. It's a hard, shameful process, even though the shame is not yours. It's simply something that you are holding for the oppressor who created this situation in the first place. So felt like that.
It's not your shame to bear.
It ain't.
One of the things I learned about you fairly quickly was wholly ambitious. We met the first week he got into town. This was like in August. And it was like, all right, big bro, I'm going to publish 2 books while I'm here. Then I'll start this and I'll start that. And I was like, fam, you haven't even stepped foot in a workshop yet, right? But that ambition. And you were such a shooting star and such a star that was committed to the ambitions that lived inside you, that they started to manifest fairly quickly. You won the Copy Common first book prize with Refuse, right? And I was like, oh shit, he's really doing all this. He said he was going to do it. And then you put me on the clock, right? I felt, which was great for me, right, as a teacher, because I learned so much through students and so much through colleagues and peers who write. You know, I felt the responsibility of stepping up to serve you in every way that I should be able to meet, you know what I mean, your ambitions, right? I can't just go, oh, just turn that in 6 months. You're like, no, big bro. A week later, here you go, read it. Oh, we're reading more. I'm saying that to ask you this question. I say all that to ask you a very simple question. Were there times, because I know the way your creative vibes kind of move, were there times due to the difficult nature of this project that you mentioned, shame, that you wanted to quit and say, I can do these other things. I can write another poetry book?
There's times I wanted to quit on this book. Girl, every day. When I say that there were so many different parts of this book that I was just like, the word that comes to mind is just uphill. Everything is uphill. The search for the records is uphill. Figuring out what is the trajectory of this journey, because I didn't want it to be like a very straightforward, I was born and then here's everything that happened and now we're caught up. Like, I definitely wanted it to feel more like the inside of my mind, that I don't really experience time in this kind of linear fashion. And like, I am here with you now, and also I am here, I simultaneously feel like I'm at my graduation reading in 2019. I simultaneously also feel like we are at when Key dropped Heavy, and he was giving his Q&A here, and like I remember him pointing to Eve in the back and saying, like, you know, we used to drive around in upstate New York to try and find the nicest hotels because they had the nicest parking lots for us to sleep in. I remember all of that in the same, and just by standing here, I'm experiencing all of those moments at the same time, right? So, there were just so many times where I was just like, I feel like I'm trying to, you say square, you can say like square peg, round hole, but I felt like it was more like I was trying to bottle the sky. Like I just couldn't figure out how to make all of these things what I was seeing in my head, which was also additionally hard because when I was here, right, I had basically like almost saw me through like the whole process of that book of Refuse coming together.
Yeah.
Like I had a draft and then completely changed that draft like 7 times. There were 96 drafts of that book, and then one day I got to give you that phone call to say that Nicole Sue says that I won it. I don't know if it's true, but that's what she said. And so there's this way that in having finished a book that was like this, right? And having finished a book that was for adults, and then having finished a prose book, and then another prose book, that it starts to feel like, well, maybe I have burned myself out. Maybe I have overstepped. Maybe I actually did not have the range to pull this off the way that I wanted to. And all of those moments make you want to quit. And those are all just internal things. Those are all just internal things. There's also the editors that you have to pitch to. The editors who say some very wild stuff to you about the book that you just proffered to them. The editors who tell you that they love this book, but it needs some editing, which is wild because it's literally in the name of their job. It's a wild piece of feedback to receive. And so all of those moments come together to tell you that maybe this book just isn't supposed to happen. Maybe the book just isn't supposed to happen, but also, like, I think that you know that you have a good book when you have gravity. Like, you have something that keeps pulling you back again and again and again. This book, anytime I wanted to be done with this book wasn't done with me.
One down with you. Yeah.
Drag me up like Kendrick did Drake. I say when we're done.
How much time do we have? Are we doing Q&A?
Oh, yeah, we can do
We
Q&A.
are in your sign.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask you 2 more questions if that's cool. Wanted to steal that title the moment I heard it. Because they don't need reminding.
They do not.
Where did that come from?
You know, the funny thing is, it's a phrase that, in a lot of ways, just originally just floated into my head. It was a poem draft that I spun up in February 2017. So we're heading into my second semester here at this point. And it's an okay poem. It's an okay poem. There's some interesting imagery there. I like the part where I was talking about the shovel and stitching the dirt, but that was the one image out of that poem that I was like, the title is stronger than anything else that's happening here. And so I just kept coming back to it over and over again. And then as I was starting to work on those initial kind of draft essays for just getting ready for workshop with Key, that phrase comes up again. It comes up in this essay about Aaron Sorkin and rhetoric, and also about fleeing Oxford during this time period in late 2017, when there was a rumor that had floated out on the internet that the Confederate statues was coming down, and then all the Proud Boys showed up to make it clear that they disagreed. And so I went to Alabama where it was safe. So
The irony.
one of the only times that I imagine anyone in my family has ever said that phrase. And I say that with all due love and respect to Alabama and the state of Tuscaloosa. But yeah, as a result of that, dang, I just lost what I was going to say. I lost what it was the next one. Yeah, so then the phrase, thank you, the phrase shows up again in terms of the dead don't need reminding. They don't need to know, the dead don't need reminding that this whole country is built on the oppression of others. It's more catalog-y in the essay, but it was set up as a parallel of the living conservatives want to return us to a time where I could not have written this to you, and the living liberals want to return us to a time where there were a bunch of very smart people who ran the country and considered me subhuman and legislated accordingly. So this phrase keeps coming back, and that's what I was talking about in terms of, you know that you have a good book when you have gravity, and it keeps coming back to this phrase again and again and again. And I eventually came to the understanding of oh, okay, well, if I'm saying the dead don't need reminding, the implication is that the living need something. Do the dead need anything? And if so, what do the dead need from me? So I had to figure out what do the living need? The living are always desperate for a song, and so I made. And so that ended up kind of being the two polarities of the book in a lot of ways. There's this pop culture bridge of how the living need this to understand what I am saying, but I trust that my dead, my ancestors, are around me, at all times, and they are following the other thread of the story where I am coming slowly, faster and faster towards where they might be, because after all of this time, all of these generations of people who were there and then not, I am back, and I have come looking for you, and I will not stop until I find you.
Child, if you don't. I would love to end there, but I have to ask you this last question, because that is like, that's a mic drop right there. But I have to ask you this. We have to end on some levity. Since you mentioned Kendrick and Drake, because one of my favorite times that I remember me and you was listening to music, and in particular listening to Drake, right? When you defended your thesis, and you were all set to graduate, I remember you walked out the room, and I walked out shortly after you, and I think somehow we crossed paths. You went to go do something, and I was walking this way, and you were walking.
Drop off the folder.
You dropped off the
I
folder.
dropped off the
signature page or something?
Yeah, the signature page where you gotta get like 20 people to sign it to be like, yes, these 3 people who have a picture with you and will attest to it, we now also need to file it.
And so you're walking in my direction now, even though we both left your defense. And so we're about to cross paths, and I just hear this music, and I used to pray for times like this, to rhyme like this, so I
to grind like that,
to shine like this. That's another
time I spent on some locked up shit in the back of the paddy wagon, cuffs locked on wrists, see my dreams unfold, nightmares come true, time to marry the game, and I said, yeah, I do.
That's Meek Mill's Dreams and Nightmares, the intro.
Indeed.
And I was like, you were having such a euphoric moment, and I felt it, right? You were just playing that music solo by yourself, walking. What was that moment about, and how did music contribute to the book?
Do you mind if I answer by reading?
Absolutely not.
True. Okay. I'm pretty sure I know where this page is. We're all going to find out together if I'm right. Yeah, okay, cool. This is from an essay called Me and Adonis Creed Are Getting Too Old for This Shit. The only thing that you need to know is that it's a list, and there are 72 steps in the famous Rocky steps. 18. Friends, Romans, Johns, I am once again returned from the summer to make an argument for Dreams and Nightmares as one of the few perfect songs of my lifetime. By which I mean to know Meek Mill's music is to know what it is about Philly that made me fall in love with this city and thank it for every punch I learned to dodge. 19. Dreams and Nightmares, the opening track of Meek's album of the same name, blooms in soft piano, and from the very beginning, it is clear that it cannot stay there. In 2015, I often was stapled to my sweaty mattress by the shame of being the one left behind. The ascending keys of the piano opening like calloused hands with a promise that Philly makes you when you start to fall in love with it. Promise that what you see is not all there is or ever will be. Philly is a largely flat street city, like the one I call home, but also a city that loves Rocky, loves the ones who learn to love the climb. 20. The whole of 2015, I will belt Meek's verse no matter how much depression has worn my voice thin, and the scorch in my throat, the near empty of my lungs, all will feel like I am alive in a city that does not want me to die. And then the beat will fail momentarily, like a heart, then surge out with Meek's voice nearly off the rails, breathless, forever unfinished. 21. The whole next verse always takes me back to an insatiable July with me in the car hearing this verse for the first time. We spittin' so hard we forget we need air. I think we may all pass out. We all may fade to black together. 22. From that Philly anthem, Meek spun many more in the shadow of that piano, that climb, that endless flight of stairs. Everything was heading upwards until it wasn't. 23. And so it was in the summer of 2015 that Meek Mill accused Drake of having a ghostwriter, and everything changed, and Drake went from professional, sensitive high school boy to extremely buff Dominican trainer Drake, and it's all been downhill sense. And so it was that Meek made a couple of wonderful intros and one perfect one, but rarely a project that slammed as hard as its beginning. And so it was that Meek didn't always know how to finish what he started. And so the summer rolled on with Drake dropping back-to-back diss tracks because Meek decided to start some shit on the road that he meant to finish in the streets and instead ended on stage at OVO Fest. Meek's brightness wavered, and I rotted in the apartment where the lights weren't always on, where the couch was always full. And so it was a summer where nothing transformed into what it was supposed to. And so the summer came to a close with all of us looking for a little more forgiveness than we found. So yeah, I think like for me, that second life starts in that track, right? That second chance at what do you want to be? How far are you willing to dare yourself to go? How high are you willing to jump from? And that song always to me is perfect because whether you are literally like in the space that I was just talking about, or in that moment right after the dissertation defense because you decided to pull some nonsense when I came in, I'm out in the hallway and he comes out to tell me the good news, but first he comes out and he's like,
So I did that? Oh my God.
and I was like, oh, for real? Oh, we done been through.
That's the worst sense of humor.
I was like, it's like that? It's like that? I bet. And so, yeah, it's that way, right? It's that way that you that piano will always be there to catch you, no matter whether you fly or fall.
That's beautiful. Love you, man. Thank you.
Love you.
I was going to ask just about, I know that finding out that the city clerk's office at Water Valley burning down and just that loss of information was like an emotional hit to you. Was there like some other ways that you tried to connect with your ancestors and your grandmother and her father, just different ways, whereas like if I can't have this physical information, what other ways can I feel close to them or feel like I know these people?
That's a wonderful question. I think for me, it comes down to like kind of imagination and lyric are a way that I feel like ancestry can be pulled close to us, right? That I'm biased, and you can almost hear it a little bit in my voice because I've been listening to Henny's latest book. There's always this year. I know he's supposed to be here plugging my book, but I also just want to say that book is incredible. And so one of the things that I was going to bring up has fled my mind temporarily. Oh, right. In the fourth quarter of the book, it's literally set up like a basketball game because, and he talks about Tamir Rice, and he talks about the general idea of black folks who have been murdered by the state, black folks who have not had a chance to live out the whole of the lives that they deserve, right? And how important it is for us to remember that they didn't just live to die. They had whole imaginations and grand aspirations about the world, passions and things that brought them joy. There were ways they loved, they had favorite drinks. And so I think for me, so much of this book is also kind of imagining for that, because by the time that I had any of these questions, my grandmother was in no fit state to answer them. There's an argument to be made that she was in no fit state to answer them the whole of my life because she had dementia. And also, there's no way to know how much her being a hard woman from a hard place was a result of being poor and having a home, and then suddenly not having a home. And so imagining in the aftermath of this threat, right, of tar and feather, like from the very beginning of me writing this book, it's very, very funny because I did this like very random little free write in 2016 about, and it was purely about me exacting vengeance on my collegiate enemies. But of course, because of the way that I write, it was not like a regular torture scene. It was me showing them that when I say black boy fly, I can literally fly. I can hover above them. And so then to come and understand that you come from this long lineage of threatened wings, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? For me, the answer was I imagined him with wings. I imagined a book in which I could be telling a story about a man who never flew where people could see him, but he flew all the same. So I think that the imagination helps me bridge the gap of where the colonizer's archive has failed. That's a good question. It's good.
So I've got some tangents first before I answer before I ask my question. I really love this piece of the book. I started it yesterday, and it feels like an offering, and so I just want to thank you. I also love it when poets turn to prose, because I think poets have a lot to teach us prose writers about, how language can be a song, right? The sort of rhythm of a sentence. The opening, there's some just beautiful parts, beautiful sentences in this piece as well. When I finished it, the song that came to my mind was Project Pat's "Don't Save Her." But I'm thinking about entry points, right? And the ways in which these scenic elements of the text, sort of work as these revisited entry points, right? But I also wonder, so I wanted you to talk a bit about that, but I also wondered, about the entry point of Proud Larry's and that moment. And for those who haven't read the book, can I give it away?
Please.
So a group of black men are at Proud Larry's, and they see a young white woman being assaulted, and they, try to, essentially,
They
yeah.
tried. They really did.
And
try.
then she ultimately calls him an N-word and
Sure
says,
did.
"I got this," right? And then that's sort of the moment of disruption, right? Yeah, and it's, the entire piece, even when we move from there, when you talk about Spider-Man and, how you find yourself in that narrative, just really beautiful snippets. But I wondered about the entry point, because it does feel like a life collage in some respects, right? If you could, sort of share your process of starting with that particular.
For sure, yeah. Okay, cool. So the first essay in the book is called Oxford, and I kind of imagined it a little bit as a triptych in the way that I thought about sonic crowns. Even though I've never successfully written a sonic crown, I love the idea of doing a sonic crown across the course of a whole book, and so that kind of ultimately ends up being the organizational principle that was most helpful to the book, but we're going to get to that in a second. That essay starts with me pulling up to Oxford the first time and talking about all of the plantation style houses that we have around here, because Hanif asked me once, do you know where all of these came from or why they are this way? And I was like, you know what, I actually have never asked that question. And then it transitions into it transitions from the image that I just found out, the mind-blowing mystery of where the Martin Luther King speeches book that shows up sometimes on the Confederate statue comes from. I can't express to y'all how exciting this is to me. This was one of those things that I'd resigned myself to just never being able to understand or know, and it was just one of those little tiny miracles that Oxford continues to put forward, right? But moving from that Proud Larry's scene, the scene in Proud Larry's is set during a Code Pink party. For me, one of the most important things about what does track one of this book do, what is the most important thing that it can do, was to establish that this is a place that I love and a place that is home to me and that I feel comfortable talking on, but also that I am not born here, right? There's a long, long story tradition of folks coming down from up north to try and tell us what we know about and what we don't. So one of the main ways that shows up, and it also shows up in the way that my mom was worried about me coming out right before I came down here, is that there's this narrative that there are not only not queer people in Mississippi, but there are not black queer people in Mississippi. And I found more black queer boys boys here than I did in my entire Northeast liberal arts college experience. You're gonna tell me there's not nobody now here gonna find a way to be free the way they want to? And so that to me was nonsense. So I wanted to set something during that time period, and I thought about all the ones that I've gone through, and me walking down that street is a direct result of a boy trying to pick me up at the party and me not noticing. So me going with him and then just continuing to walk down the block because how else am I going to get home? They stopped right you all know, the bus has stopped. So I walk by and I see this scene starting to unfold. I'm like, I have to, like, someone like love's going to drive you across the street. You have to try and help these boys. You have to try and help them get away from the situation, de-escalate it, because everything was already in full chaos by the time that I got there, right? That whole sequence to me is about showing, like, this is a place of joy, but like anywhere else in America, it's also a place of danger. But it's not danger in necessarily the shape that you imagine it to be. None of these punches are things that land on me. They're punches that land on someone who would be considered innocent by default from the cops. And the cops are nowhere to be found because they're down at the end of the street letting these little undergrad girls pet their horses, which was nonsense. But I think that was such an endemic, like, emblematic moment of like, oh, this is the duality that, like, I can walk and I can be having an amazing time, and then it can all just flip on a dime. That's America. That's America right there. And so I thought that was going to be a really useful, like, kind of opening piece, and then to skip ahead a couple of years and close out by talking about the History Rich program and all of these elements of Black history in Oxford that just don't get told in part of the narrative of how we talk about how this town came together. I know this is a really long answer to your question. I appreciate y'all indulging me. But yeah, so that originally was not track one of the book for a wide range of reasons. I was like, oh, well, that's the expected one. And then my amazing editor, Molly, was like, okay, but maybe it's expected for a reason. Maybe if you say, well, amen, well, goddamn, Mississippi is all arrivals, Mississippi is all beginnings, we should start with you arriving. And so I was like, okay, well, if we're starting in Oxford then, I don't worry about putting Greenville at the end because it becomes a journey across 18 essays and 135 miles. And that creates the framework of like, okay, well, how, if you know that you have one end of the battery and the other end of the battery, then all you need really is to fill it with the juice. How does the juice start to organize itself? And so I started trying to think about what were the other elements that, like I said, like you said, we got a small intimate group here, so I don't feel bad saying this. Just keep an eye on every time somebody in the book asks me what I'm doing in Mississippi. Because if you're gonna write something that's serialized in this way, but not serialized, it's like even necessarily for like a poetry collection like this, that doesn't end up becoming the process. But you have to start thinking about the reader, right? About like what are they actually going to do with the book? I have a best friend who is like a brother to me. He is one of the most prolific and wonderful readers I ever met. And I found out, like, halfway through the organizing process of this book, that he'd been reading just like individual random poems from my book. Like he would just kind of pick it up and like kind of flip to a page and like read a poem and then come back and like flip to another page and read to it. And I was like, that's really fascinating because when you're in an MFA world, you're surrounded by people who read MFA style, right? You're surrounded by people who read poetry books sometimes, often, myself included, in one sitting, aloud, back to back to back to back, as if it's a movie. And so knowing that I didn't have to only adhere to or prioritize the way that I would read it, I only need to prioritize the way that I would write it. And that ended up helping so much with the clarification of like what pieces should go where. I'm going to end my answer now so it doesn't take 10 minutes.
Thank you for that.
And we.
Just one more question.
How do you feel like your relationship with Mississippi has changed since you moved away?
I miss it. It's like a favorite cousin that you don't get to see all that often. I don't think that I was necessarily in a position to appreciate appreciate it in the immediate aftermath of me leaving, how I was going to miss it and how much I was going to miss it, because I leave in May of 2019. So we have less than a year until the entire world explodes, right? And I think that as a result of that, I didn't necessarily have like a normal world to graduate into. And so there was a way that I could kind of, how do I phrase this? You kind of end up essentializing like what was your life like here. And I was like, nah, I was so much more focused. I was so much more down. And like I was just producing like 8-9 poems a month, and now I can do maybe 3 in a year. And how do you rationalize that? But I think that it's settled back now. It's more in balance with like, okay, I wrote more things back then, but I also had fewer responsibilities. I wrote more drafts, but I also knew less about where I was going. And so once I had that separation, kind of filter-wise, in terms of thinking about my experience, it frees me up to enjoy the memories that are real, if that makes sense. So it's just good to be home. Thanks so much for coming, y'all.